Welcome to The Breakdown with Brodkorb and Becky, a weekly podcast that breaks down politics, policy, and current affairs. I'm Becky Scherr.
And I'm Michael Brodkorb.
We're back with a bonus episode that takes a breath from the chaos and focuses on what really matters in public service, governing with integrity and building real consensus to improve life for Minnesotans. In an era where political discourse often feels like a race to the loudest headline, we want to highlight the leaders who are actually doing the work, those who prioritize outcomes over outrage and policy over performative politics. Joining us today is someone who embodies that approach, Representative Nolan West, a Republican from Blaine who served in the Minnesota House since 2016. Nolan has developed a reputation at the Capitol for being thoughtful, collaborative, and refreshingly focused on ideas instead of sound bites. In this conversation, we'll talk with Representative West about how to elevate constructive voices at the Capitol, what bipartisanship actually looks like in practice, and how lawmakers can push back on the pull towards divisiveness, even within their own party. Thanks for joining us today and enjoy the show.
We are very excited to be joined by Representative Nolan West this morning for this bonus episode of The Breakdown with Brodkorb and Becky. And one of the things we wanted to talk with him about is just how he approaches his job, how he approaches speaking to and working on both sides of the aisle, and how he is such an effective legislator in kind of this hyper-partisan time. And I wanted to kick things off with you, talking about kind of the state of discourse. We've seen a lot of anger and even some violence stemming from politics. Is this an environment that you expected when you ran for the legislature?
No. Well, I was first elected in 2016, and that was a very interesting time. And, well, I guess I had some death threats in my first campaign when I met with the police, just because, man, got to make sure it's okay. I didn't really take them too seriously, but just in case, I'm like, I don't want to call the cops and have them not show up because they think it's a hoax or something. They said they should come no matter what I say, which was encouraging. But one of the other things they said that I find oddly satisfying or soothing, was if somebody's going to kill you, they're not going to tell you about it. All these people, just ignore them. And that, I don't think, is that comforting if you think about it too much, but it does make it so you're like, okay, whatever, all this stupid negativity, especially around that, forget about it. Now, present events obviously shift that dramatically, but I think another thing I've taken away is you just have to keep doing what you're doing, for lack of a better phrase. And if there's some lunatic out there who wants to get you, they're probably going to figure out a way. And the worst thing we could do is make the world a worse place with some stupid reactionary laws or something like that in regards to this. And what I think of first is I'm very opposed to like metal detectors at the state capitol. That wouldn't have helped any of the situations that are being discussed at all. Why would we make citizens have to go through security screening to talk to their representatives? We should have security present, but to treat everybody like a criminal, I'm very opposed to that. So I guess that is how I'm approaching it right now, is the same as I have from the beginning, but with an extra nod and effort to be decent and kind and listen before making snarky comments.
How have you kept such a good mindset about it? I feel like with what we see on Twitter, especially in the legislature, you've been there almost, 8-9 years now, and campaigning and involved before that. I have to feel like, at least in my experience and when I was working for the state party or on campaigns, it's easy to get a little hardened by what is lobbed at you or lobbed at your party or your policies, and kind of we see it from legislators on both sides or electeds on both sides up and down the aisle or up and down the ticket. We see folks kind of do a mass generalization, right, of they had a bad experience with this group of Republicans or this group of Democrats, and just we hate them all, we're against them all, we're not going to work with them all. How have you maintained a level head and reasonable mindset around that you're still willing to go into these conversations on the positive rather than the negative?
Well, so this may not be perfect, but one of the quotes that I absolutely love from Rick and Morty is, "Your boos mean nothing to me. I've heard what makes you cheer." And a lot of when you're in this role, you do crave positive affirmations. Like, I never was that type of person prior to being elected, but once you're elected, you just, because you care so much, you're a representative, you want to hear everything, and then you zero in on both the positive and negatives, and you just want any positive reinforcement. Feels like a wonderful drug. And I've learned that I don't even appreciate positive comments that I don't necessarily agree with. Like, I don't want people to assume I think the way they do if that gets me their support or something like that. I want the support of people I have tremendous respect for, the support of people who want to make the world a better place, but I don't want necessarily the support of people who want to, just fight for the sake of fighting. I don't think that's valuable, and it's just toxic, and you see that a lot. What I try and do, which I failed just recently, is be less snarky. So, I accidentally got in the news for criticizing some right-wing influencer I've never heard of, so I'm just assuming because people are calling them that, lying about Melissa Hortman's murder. And at the end of that, I said, it's radical not to be a lunatic. And, that was basically a shit post that ended up getting in the news, which is something that every politician needs to remember. And looking at that I like, when you speak like that, it doesn't help, because so if somebody's reading that who believes the opposite of what I was saying, that last statement kind of nullifies any effort of persuasion or influence of any way. So trying to eliminate the unnecessary snark. Sometimes it's fun, but eliminate the unnecessary snark and lead with open dialogue. And that's where, like, with Charlie Kirk has really been like impactful, of asking questions. He only seems like a total jerk if you're reading his quotes ridiculously out of context. But if you read what he is when he's talking to people, watching the videos, when he's engaging with people directly, it's always having them flesh out their ideas to the fullest and having a reasoned discussion rather than just dunking on them, which dunking happens. But I don't think dunking and being snarky is productive in any way, and too many people indulge in it, myself included. So my hope is to do that less. And my resting anxiety rate is like negative. This drives my wife crazy because I should be anxious a lot more than I am. And that helps very much in this present situation, to where I can just be like, it'll be fine. And my brain actually believes that.
Are you finding that there are people out there, more and more or less, that want to approach things your way? One of the reasons why we're doing this bonus episode and is because I've talked a bit over the last few weeks, particularly the last week or so, how my gas tank is empty again. And again, it's just low on good, positive energy. And there's so much negativity right now and conflict entrepreneurs and things like that. Do you think that there's been a shift in one way or the other? Are there people out there that are receptive, or is the tide getting worse?
That is a very good question, and something everybody should observe. I would say they're like kind of a both sides answer, like a classic politician. There is definitely a shift. The biggest shift you'd see is all these people getting canned for saying awful things about Charlie Kirk's murder. And I don't love people getting fired for what they say in general. I don't think Charlie Kirk likes that either. Now, each situation's different. And what I don't want to see is some sort of speech police come out of the government in response to, like, a right-wing speech police is just as bad as a left-wing speech police. I don't want to see us move in that direction. So I think the turning point, the shift, is suddenly it's like, oh, the left has said some awful things about the right, and they're kind of getting what's coming. Whereas the right, whenever a right-wing person would say something stupid or distasteful, they suffered consequences immediately almost every single time. So my hope is the shift is, okay, look at all this reactionary activity that's people on the left getting punished like people on the right would be punished. Maybe we should stop doing that now that we see mutually assured destruction. Let's just have a reasonable discussion. So I think we've seen a shift there, and people have really clearly witnessed it. But the biggest thing, I give the same speech at my fundraisers that I do everywhere. And that is, yes, the majority of people are decent and reasonable. The majority of the people want to see us work together. The majority of the people want to focus on the things that make sense and want to ignore these ridiculous political issues that derail things. But those same people aren't the ones who contribute. They aren't the ones who donate. They don't volunteer. They focus on their own lives, which is totally fair. I get it. And their gas tanks are empty, like you say, and they just can't take another minute of politics. But that's one of the problems is the decent people, that's their reaction is, oh, God, no way. I'm not going to do this. But in a representative republic, the representatives are reflective of the public who are active and vote and work and support candidates that actually reflect their beliefs. And right now, we reflect the public elected officials by and large. That's why they're so divided. That's why you have people like AOC and Marjorie Taylor Greene. It's a reflection of the politically active public. It's an accurate reflection, I would say. So the majority are normal people, but they don't get up and get in it. So my mantra is the one thing we should take away is if you feel like your gas tank's empty, your reaction should be, holy crap, I need to do something. I need to get involved, maybe even run themselves, because we need a lot more normal people doing this. And that is the biggest problem.
We know that in this kind of, it's a cyclical thing that the folks that are kind of bombastic get the attention, and then, that makes more people want to sling more mud and get more attention. And I can see where it gets a little addicting to folks, right? Like people run for office because they want to make a name for themselves and obviously want to do good things. But I can see where some folks get stuck in that. And I want to applaud you because I think you are not one of those folks. You've kind of really gone to the Capitol, kept your head down, been a reasonable leader, and having a respectful role in public service. Can you talk to us a little bit about how that's the benefits that you've seen from that and the value that's in that of showing up, doing the hard work, and just kind of letting the results of your work stand for itself?
Well, the number one thing people should, if somebody's going to be a good elected official, the first thing they should feel when they walk into the building, like the Capitol, is, holy crap, this job is so big and I know nothing. I thought I knew a ton when I went in. I was like, oh, I've been studying government. I've been in politics. I know what I'm doing. And then I got there. I was like, oh my God, why am I on the energy committee? I don't know anything about the energy grid. And my favorite part of the job, I got to sit down with like folks from Xcel Energy and talk to them for 2 hours, ask them questions. Got to sit down with folks from Conexus Energy, and people want to come and explain things to you. And it's just the greatest. Like, it's the best part of the job. You get all these experts who want you to understand. And if you don't believe what they're saying, you can go find the opposite person and have them explain the opposite perspective. It's just the best. And you don't have to pay $250,000 a year to do it. So that is the best part of the job. And I think the elected officials should have that humility when they get there is, holy buckets, this is huge. That's why there's 134 members of the House. Now, in these horrible times, being that type of, I'm just going to work on things and try and look at them objectively and not delve into the partisanship. The more partisan it gets, the more benefit I do get from that, because people are like, oh my goodness, you're actually looking at this without making up your mind already, is really the biggest difference. And that is helpful for like me personally, but I don't want it to be helpful. I'd like it to be normal. And then we just have some regular ass people working. In the long run, I think we will see a return to some sort of civility. I think we are approaching the peak of awfulness, and that's not a prediction that I'm super confident in, but I have to believe it or else I would not continue to do this.
David Montgomery shared a poll recently about political violence, and it said most Americans across the political spectrum say political violence is never justified. But younger and more liberal Americans are more likely to disagree. It's concerning how there is, I think, as much as there's positives out there and where things are at, that there is still a belief that political violence is acceptable in terms of to achieve a political goal. How do you go about your job knowing that there is a percentage of people out there who think that political violence is a way in which to resolve a political debate?
I don't think the people believe they'll resolve a political debate through violence. I think their goal is to be heard. And that's where I think it really stems from, because it's in both parties, the most extreme elements are actually the youngest, which is normal. You know, college students are always like, when I was a psycho in college, I thought we should privatize roads, like all roads and the post office. I would, because the market could sort this out better, blah, blah, blah. And like growing up, you're like, oh, this is how the real world works. But you look at the radicals, and I think, but you pair that with, so I went to my education, and when I left was when colleges got really bad. So I missed most of it. But my professors still were, you know, I went to the political science program at the U, and they were very, very much left wing, but not to the degree they became after I graduated in 2013. And with these young kids, now they're in that echo chamber of blood and murder in higher education. And then they also look to the future, and especially if they took on way too much debt, they don't see a successful future with the system as it is. And that actually really applies to both sides. On the right wing, you have like the deep state, the government's rigging everything against you. On the left wing, you have billionaires are rigging everything against you. And when they don't believe that they're going to succeed through the normal means of being part of society, that's where they get crazy. And I think that's a huge problem. And that's one of the reasons why, like, home affordability is to me, a survival level issue, because if these people don't believe they're ever going to own a home, like own their slice of the world, they're never going to really buy into what I would argue is the American dream. So when there's no hope, people get nasty, and we're seeing that. And especially with the political, like, the public isn't asking for the medicine they need, I would say, like to balance the federal budget, for example, like the big beautiful bill, a lot of great things in it, but it didn't really focus on fixing this deficit situation. But the public isn't saying they want that. But what I would say to politicians who are obsessed with following these polls is, well, sometimes you have to, like, you don't go look at the group and go, I'm going to go lead that group by going where they're going. You go lead, and people follow you because they actually believe you. And that's one thing that I think, if we have elected officials who say both sides of the issue, like, here's what I believe, I think this is right, I see where they're coming from here, this is why I disagree with this position, but it's a valid criticism, like something like that, but a little more poetic, builds credibility that politicians just don't have now. Because you see them talk and you're like, oh, okay, everything they're saying is a lie, because every single thing they say is only saying great things about this one thing. And I think if politicians took a broader perspective, we could actually lead, rather than continuing to do what we think the polling wants and drive the country into the ground, and then have these kids have no hope. And when people have no hope, they turn to violence. That's my little philosophy of the world I've been thinking about that a lot recently.
I mean, I think you articulated it very well, and I agree. I think that the people, like you said, that they want to be heard. And I think I want you to speak a little bit to how you work at the Capitol. Obviously, you talk about, all of the experts that you get to talk to from different corporations and organizations and different parcels of the world. But I think what we've kind of run into is, with this hyper-partisanship and with some folks, elected officials, who are so, it's my way or the highway, we lose some of that being heard, right? We lose some folks that are Democrats that are willing to hear from Republicans coming in their office, Republicans willing to hear from Democrats coming in those office, and those being heard, which ironically enough is what Charlie Kirk built his platform on, right? I mean, that is, his whole thing was allowing people to be heard, say their piece, try to convince him otherwise, and he would kind of articulate back where he stood and why he disagreed. How do you work up at the Capitol with meeting with folks from all walks of life and having those conversations and making sure that people, even if you do disagree with them, are able to be heard, especially your constituents?
Yeah, that is a difficult thing, because nobody wants to hear people disagree with them. And nobody, and especially a politician, we don't like disagreeing with people to their face. But a little story. So this is a few years ago, but there was several college students who came in to talk about some very, very left-wing issues. So I was like not excited about the meeting, but they're constituents, and I'll always meet with constituents 100% of the time, no matter what. And basically, I said nothing, as frequently I do in those situations. And they felt later, they commented somewhere that they felt like I was rude because I didn't move out from behind my desk. I sat behind my desk instead of moving to like a more open space. So I'm like, yeah, that's a fair point, and I should be more willing to engage. So now I don't sit behind my desk unless it's all about work and we need the space. If it's like meeting constituents, even if I disagree with them, I'm like, it might make a huge difference and make them feel heard if I don't have barriers between me and them. So then I went and sat there, and then I reached out to him and said, I'm sorry you feel that way. Happy to discuss it later. Did not mean to be offensive. And from that experience, now I do disagree with people to their face almost every single time unless they're making me nervous. And what I found is, as long as you're not a jerk about it and you articulate why, you just don't say you're wrong and you're stupid for thinking that, people go, okay, well, I really appreciate knowing where you stand. And politicians are afraid of that generally, of, oh no, I'm going to lose that support. But honestly, I think it creates more support because people don't expect a politician to be actually honest with them. And that's where you look at all these people like reacting to the extremes and pandering to the extremes. And it's like, there is a giant amount of people who will respond to a balanced perspective. People are just dying for it. So that's just a little story of how I was able to go like, okay, I'm doing this wrong, and then made a slight adjustment. And it has been, I think, better for everyone involved, both the people in my office and myself.
Minnesota has been on the front lines, sadly, of political violence and other types of violence that we've seen manifest over the last few months. There may be a special session, but the regular session is coming up independent of that. What is your thought process coming in, and how have the events of the last few months changed how you think legislators will govern and lead in next session and into the future?
Legislators have gotten progressively more closed off to the public post-COVID, and I feel like that trend is going to continue, which I'm very, very opposed to. I'm hoping that's not like security at the Capitol. I know is going to be talked about like crazy in this next session, which I could see us locking more entrances, but I would generally be opposed to anything else. But my hope is, and a ton of stuff will be reactionary to all these things and fixes that look good and sound good, but when you really dig into them, you got to think about the unintended consequences, and particularly around mental health. So you have Democrats want to really expand who's disqualified from owning a firearm. And you hear from some Republicans are like, we should expand that to trans people because the shooter was trans. And I'm very much like, I think we need to protect minors and should not make irreversible surgery to minors. But once you're an adult, if like it's your own choice, and I don't think you should be deprived of your Second Amendment rights because, you live your life in a different way that I do. That is where I see us going in a stupid direction of trying to do these things that they think will keep people safe that won't end up keeping people safe. And the only result will be less freedom for everyone or for particular groups of people, which I'm opposed to completely. So my hope is we can keep an evidence-based discussion. It's going to be very difficult because it's a super emotional issue considering everything that's happened. But Lord willing, we can do some good and be thoughtful about it.
Kind of along those same lines, with such a wild, crazy world that we're living in with the hyper-partisan folks out there, voters, elected officials, and everyone. Obviously, here in Minnesota, we have the unique opportunity situation at our legislature where it's, 50-50, right? You are forced to have to work together to get anything done. Talk to us a little bit about the benefits, or if you see this as a potential benefit for Minnesota, for our legislature versus maybe elsewhere, because the compromise and the working together and the cohesiveness is kind of forced upon our elected officials. And also talk to us a little bit about how you in particular go about finding that common ground while also being able to stay true to your principles.
it's about having the right principles makes it easy to find common ground. It's just humility is the number one the number one attribute every legislator should have is humility. It's not a job that is conducive to that, as we all know, but like I'm just blown away by how much I don't know every single day. So I enjoy the process of learning, and that just makes every issue that comes up, it's a lot easier to stay balanced because I want to hear a clearly articulated version of the other side.
You know, you want to be productive, you want to get legislation passed. How do you, with this makeup, try to propose things to find that common ground, but also staying true to your principles, what you believe in?
One thing that I think is great to illustrate kind of this topic is you look at the trifecta that just happened for the Democrats and the trifecta from 2013. And you'd think the trifecta with a massive Democrat majority in both bodies and the governor would be like more leftist and extreme than a Democrat majority that's just hardly there. You know, they had just the narrowest of all narrow trifectas, but the result was a far more extremist governing. And that's where the system kind of doesn't work perfectly, because when you're in these narrow majorities, the thought should be that should mean you represent, you know, you moderate your position to because you only represent 50.1% of the population. But what happens is you're beholden to the most extremist elements of your respective caucus because you need every single vote. And you know you're not going to get any votes on the other side. And that's where the caucus system makes it so this is supposed to be a compromising situation, but it turns into a more extremist situation. The tie is beautiful because it completely nukes that kind of thinking from orbit because you can't do anything. You can't even move a bill out of a committee without having consensus. And I think that is I have a greater appreciation for divided government more than ever, particularly after the trifecta, when huge mistakes were made, even though those mistakes were being pointed out every step of the way. Now we have we don't get to do everything we'd like to do, but we do pass laws that represent the vast majority of the state rather than 50.1%. And that is a unique positive position. Now, we can't undo everything the trifecta did, and we can fight about that. But the reality is, like, stability is a very, very, very underrated quality in government. And we've been spoiled as Americans of how nice it is to have a stable government. And my hope is we can appreciate that again. And that's what the tie gives us, is a more deliberative approach.
I have one final question here. Sorry, Michael. As we look forward, I want you to be as optimistic as possible. Where do you hope we go from here? If this is the tipping point, if we're close to the tipping point, where do you think and hope that we can come back together, move forward? And what's your ultimate goal for 2, 5, 50 years down the road? $1 million question, but give us your optimism here.
Well, my hope is that the lesson learned by elected leaders is that the words they use matter, and it matters in every situation. So if you go to, like your BPOU and go hardcore extremist, and then you say something different to another group and different to another group, that's what politicians do generally. There is a cost to that. There is a cost to calling your opponents Nazis and fascists. Like, it's a serious problem. And making people believe that, like, the government's controlled by a cabal of child sex predators also is not helpful. And it deteriorates trust between everyone. So my optimistic hope, is people see this. The left sees their people getting canceled as they used to cancel the right and goes, maybe we shouldn't behave in this manner. So both be more decent, but also maybe we give people the benefit of the doubt, and we move away from the cancel culture attitude that now is weaponized by both parties. Then you look at how government has been used. Like, you go all the way Obama using the IRS to punish Tea Party groups back in 2009 or 2010. And then you go to what the Democrats perceive Trump using political power to oppress Democrat-leaning states and Democrat groups. And it's like, we should all be looking at these things and go, that's too much power. We shouldn't use things for these reasons. We should not be Like, we shouldn't just be attacking, we should be coming up with solutions and listening. And that would be my hope, is elected leaders listen more, pay attention to their rhetoric, and then the public at large, as we talked about earlier, the regular people realize they can't just let the crazies do it. They can't just let the crazies run the political system. They have to get involved. They have to participate, either themselves or support somebody they believe in. Because if we just leave it up to the people who scream the loudest, this is where we end up. So I think we can get there. I think it's possible, but it's by no means automatic.
Representative, I want to thank you so much for taking time today to talk with us. Becky and I, when we were looking at doing this series, we honed in right on you. And this interview is an absolute testament as to why you are the perfect person to kick off this new series. You've been nothing but thoughtful and deliberative and engaged, and your approach has been steady and calm. And one of the things that I have 3 kids who aren't on social media, but my kids can read and they can hear and they know what their dad's producing. And I am so sensitive to what I'm pushing out into this void that has become so hate-filled. And having this opportunity to speak with you just really, for lack of a better, just really fills my heart and gives me hope to where this state can go. We're not going to agree on every issue, but boy, oh boy, I absolutely believe this state is better because there's a Representative Nolan West in the legislature. And I want to thank you so much for taking time today.
Thanks for having me.
Becky, we just interviewed Representative Nolan West for a bonus episode, and it's kind of a bonus episode series we're going to start doing. We can fit them in with people that I think are really adding value and being out there in a positive way and highlighting some of those voices that we think are increasing to positive discourse, positive debate. Not necessarily everyone's agreeing, but they're contributing in a positive way to the overall discourse and democracy as we know it in the state. Your take on the interview?
I mean, it was just really refreshing in everything that we have going on to hear reasonable, common sense approach to governing, to his position as the state representative, to working within his caucus and across the aisle. I mean, a couple of things that I wanted to pull out is, he talked about how hearing from experts and constituents and going into those conversations without an opinion until you're fed all the information or given information. Novel concept, right? That we withhold making opinions and stating our stake in the ground until we have the full picture. But it is this day and age. And so that in itself was just really nice to hear. Hearing how he has evolved in his approach to dealing with constituents and folks from the other side, and being respectful and wanting to make sure that everybody does feel heard and respected when they meet with him, is just incredible. And then, I think we've seen this. He mentioned a news article that he joked a little bit about a snarky comment, but the premise of this article and what we've seen from him is willing to hold everybody, including his own side, the Republicans, fellow Republicans, hold them accountable and call out mistruths. And in this case, it was also someone I'm unfamiliar with, but a supposed Republican influencer who was alluding to the fact that the person responsible for assassinating Speaker Hortman and her husband and dog was, a crazy Democrat and all of these different things. And Representative West was one among, I believe, Representative Franzen as well, speaking up and saying that's not the case, explaining the appointment by Governor Walz to the task force and just trying to dispel some of this misinformation and disinformation out there, even when it's at the hands of somebody who claims to be a fellow Republican. And we know that it's really easy for people to turn the other way and just allow those things to perpetuate and continue bubbling up. And so I appreciate Representative West for being a leader in that situation and really kind of taking an axe to any of that misinformation that he sees out there and trying to keep things above board. And so I love his optimism. I love his desire to want to do well for the constituents, for the people of Minnesota, and make this a place that is better for his children, my children, your children, and all of us.
I couldn't agree more with what you said. And I think your question at the end to him was probably the best in the interview. The question that you asked about where he sees things going and the hope that he has. I thought it was a great question you asked. I also found, just to be very specific, I thought his approach to the feedback about how he sat in the office was just so introspective, and it was just so, it just showed a level of thought and care that he had to his job, that he was, listening to that feedback and that criticism and reached back out and changed his approach, kind of about how he even sat in the office and interacted with people, that kind of physical proximity. That's very thoughtful. And I think that Representative Nolan West has shown a level of thoughtfulness just to see how can I make, even with constituents that I disagree with or people that I disagree with their positions, how can I make them feel comfortable even when I'm speaking to them and talk to them at their level, I think is so important. And one of the other things I wanted to say, just one more point, is the rage algorithms right now. We have such a focus right now on the hate and the conflict entrepreneurs, which I wrote about in my Substack post. My hope is by elevating some of these voices that you and I can help elevate, we can tilt some of these algorithms a little bit, or at least shave a little bit off them in a way that we're highlighting that there's where I truly think it's the silent majority of people are, where they just want responsible leaders that listen to both sides, come to the right conclusion and move forward, and they don't want all of this other kind of conflict, noise, and rage out there. And I hope we can do, I hope we're doing our part by elevating these good voices like Representative Nolan West.
Absolutely. And, just one more comment on that story of the college students that he shared, and what he ended up the interview by saying is that giving people the benefit of the doubt a little bit, right? Like, so many folks, so many elected officials could have received that feedback and rolled their eyes and been like, that's just college Democrats. They'll find anything to be pissed off about, and just disregarded it and continued to conduct themselves in the way that they have been and that they believe they should. So to even take that from someone that, again, he, knew that there was a little common ground there, take that and say, that is something that I can do differently. And like you said, change his approach, giving them the benefit of the doubt that they did feel a little disrespected, that they did feel a little not heard because of the way he was sitting behind his desk, and now coming out and making it more approachable for future meetings, I just think is so simple, but such a huge impact, I'm sure, on so many different folks that have come through his office since then. And so I think it is a great thing to remind people of, is giving people the benefit of the doubt, whether that's somebody who you interact with at the gas station who is a little rude or might be having a bad day, or any walk of life. I think giving people the benefit of the doubt and brushing things off a little bit more and moving forward and just trying to do our own to spread kindness rather than react to rudeness or displeasure. I think that it's something that's so simple in so many different ways that we can implement in our politics and our elected officials. And I mean, we're all just craving some goodness. And so let's try to get there.
No, you're absolutely right. Becky, thank you so much for doing this today and making time. And thank you again to Representative Nolan. Sorry, let me do it again. Thank you, Becky, for doing this today. And thank you to Representative Nolan West. And we're going to be doing more of these over the coming weeks. We want to thank you for listening to this bonus episode of The Breakdown with Brodkorb and Becky. Before you go, show some love for your favorite podcast by leaving us a review on Apple Podcasts or on the platform where you listen. You can also follow us on our website and across all social media platforms at @BBBreakPod. The Breakdown with Brodkorb and Becky will be back next week. Thank you so much for joining us.
Bye.